When we talk about design, what comes to mind? Elegant furniture? Delicate artwork? Hot fashion trends? Cavemen? In fact, those very early sketches on primitive cave walls are humankind's first attempts at this ancient art, design. We've been designing about as long as we've been standing upright. To design is to arrange the parts or details of our creation for a particular purpose or effect. It's part of being human. Which means that design covers a lot of ground. Interiors, buildings, clothing, gardens, machines, photography, you name it. If someone's planning a creation, he or she is a designer. But why do some designs succeed in the eyes of others, while some just can't be taken too seriously? The success of a particular design depends upon how well the creation fulfills a universal, almost instinctual desire on the part of the viewer to experience balance, rhythm, emphasis, proportion, and harmony when looking at a design. These 5 criteria have remained stable throughout the millenniums and among different cultures. These are the principles of design. They are the principles we aim for, no matter what we choose to design. In this video, we'll study each principle separately to understand what it means and how it contributes to a finished design. The first principle is balance. In design, we achieve balance when the parts of our design are equally distributed to create a sense of stability. We're all familiar with physical balance. When our weight is evenly distributed, we're in balance. In the physical world, balance works like a pair of scales. We may have 3 oranges on each side, or perhaps we replace one side with a grapefruit, which is roughly the size of the 3 oranges. Either way, we've balanced the physical weight. This is called physical balance. What we're looking at right now also has visual balance. With visual balance, physical weight is not important. What's important is the size of the balanced items. How much space is each taking up? If the 2 sides are taking up approximately the same amount of space and are an equal distance from the center, we have what is called visual balance. This doesn't mean that each half must be identical, but rather that they must visually balance out. When there's too much on one side, it looks imbalanced, something we generally want to avoid as designers. Why is balance so important? Well, a lot of it has to do with gravity. We learn early that losing balance hurts. So, as creatures that need to stay physically balanced to stay safe, our brains are wired to seek balance. This need for balance is so automatic and so important to humans that even looking at something out of balance has a disturbing effect. We're used to balance in building structures. The Leaning Tower of Pisa is a drastic exception. Part of its fame is due to the fact that it looks like it's going to tip over. It's just disorienting. Things that are balanced, on the other hand, strike us as normal and comfortable. Fortunately, there are several ways to achieve balance in design. One way is to create symmetrical balance. Take an object or composition of objects and create an imaginary dividing line through the middle. If the 2 halves are the same or create a mirror image of each other, you have symmetrical balance. Notice the left and right sides of this composition are mirror images. Many things in nature have symmetry, including our own bodies, the bodies of other creatures, and plant forms. For this reason, symmetrical balance is often associated with the beauty of the natural world. Symmetrical balance is predictable, stable, serene. We associate symmetry with dignity and formality. In fact, symmetrical balance is often called formal balance. In interiors, architecture, landscaping, and even personal appearance, we see symmetry. Another kind of balance is asymmetrical balance, which is also called informal balance. This is when the two halves of our design are not identical, but are equal in visual weight. Notice how the two halves of this Matisse painting are not the same, yet the lavender element on the lower left balances the spotted cream-colored object on the lower right. The placement and size of these two very different components visually balance the composition. Here, the candlesticks add visual weight to the upper left, but they are balanced out by the clock frame and flower on the lower right. Yet another example of asymmetrical balance. The flowers on the left are different from those on the right side. Look carefully. It's not a symmetrical design, but it is a balanced composition. The design elements on each side take up about the same amount of space and are about the same distance from the center. Because informal or asymmetrical balance offers more variety for the viewer, it strikes us as more exciting and dramatic. The eye is compelled to roam over both halves to examine the differences and note their visual weight. If balance is achieved, then the effect is calming and pleasing. A quick review. We achieve balance in design when the parts of our design are equally distributed. Symmetrical or formal balance means the two halves on either side of the center are identical or mirror images. Nature is full of symmetrical balance. We associate it with stability, calm, dignity. With asymmetrical or informal balance, the halves are not identical but have equal visual weight. Less common, but equally effective, is something called radial balance. Think of the spokes on a bicycle tire. With radial balance, the design elements radiate outward from a central point. We see this frequently in flower formations and other elements of the natural world. Designers may use radial balance to draw our attention either to the center or to the edges of a circular design. Here, the photographer arranges a group photo in a radial composition. We can also balance our design by matching the visual weight of the top half to the bottom half. This is called vertical balance. Horizontal balance means the design is balanced on the left and right sides. To review, radial balance spreads out from the center point like the rays of the sun. Vertical balance stresses top and bottom equality, and horizontal balance means the designer has balanced the left and the right. Add in the concepts of symmetrical and asymmetrical balance, and you've got the basics of the first principle of design: balance. The second principle of design is rhythm. To get an understanding of how visual rhythm works, think of how rhythm works in music. Rhythm is the repetition of a beat. It works the same in design, but instead of the repeated beat coming from a drum, it's coming from a repeated line, shape, color, texture, or pattern. And here's the interesting part. Your viewer's eye will follow your beat, jumping from one beat to the next. If, for example, you've chosen to set up your rhythm with a repeated color, your viewer's eye immediately registers the color as the beat and will physically follow the beats. Here, the red socks create the beat. Our eyes automatically move from one pair of socks to the next. We all scan this image in the same way. We can't help it. It's how our brains respond to visual rhythm. Now, it's not always color that sets up the rhythm. In this composition, it's a repeated shape, the balloons that determine the beat. Notice they're creating a vertical visual rhythm. They lead our eyes up and down rather than side to side. Maybe you want to set the rhythm up diagonally, as we see with the silver spirals. Rhythm takes advantage of the viewer's instinctive need to receive visual direction. Human eye movement is not random. It automatically seeks an organized way to view what's placed in front of it, and will take its cue from you, the designer. Regular rhythm is the most predictable. The repeated beat is the same each time. Graduated rhythm is when the beat speeds up or slows down as you move along. Think of how water ripples form when you throw a rock into the water. These ripples have a graduated rhythm. It works the same in design. Each time we see the repeated line, color, texture, shape, or pattern, it comes a little sooner or a little later than the last one. Can you detect the subtle use of graduated rhythm in this painting? Henri Rousseau uses the oranges as the beat. Random rhythm is when your visual beat happens at irregular intervals throughout the pattern, as in Van Gogh's Starry Night. Look at the stars as the beat. Random rhythm is sort of the visual equivalent of a complicated jazz number. When using random rhythm, remember to keep an overall sense of balance so as not to disorient your viewer. Let's do a quick review. You set up rhythm by repeating a specific line, shape, color, texture, or pattern throughout your design. The repeated element becomes the rhythmic beat. You create a regular rhythm by placing the beat at regular intervals. In random rhythm, there's no regularity to the placement of the beat. And a graduated rhythm is when the beats get progressively closer or further apart. One final use of rhythm that deserves mention is a method known as gradated rhythm. Now, let's not confuse graduated and gradated. They're two very different things. Gradated rhythm is when our repeated element is identical with the exception of one detail. And that detail increases or decreases gradually with each repetition. Look at the top row of windows. They're identical except for one detail, height. The height increases with each repetition as we move towards the center. Now, let's suppose we've decided to gradate the color. That means that with each repetition, the color will be altered, but in a consistent manner. In this example, we start out with red and add a little more yellow with each repetition. We're not going to suddenly add a little blue or white. It's important to be consistent with gradation, only changing one element and changing it in the same way and to the same degree with each successive repetition. Look at how this works in art. In this Henri Rousseau painting, each of the repeated flowers in the center row gets a little bit redder as we move towards the right. In addition to color, gradation might also be used with line, making each repetition, for example, a bit shorter. Here's the same principle of line gradation at work with another Rousseau painting. Notice the tree trunks getting taller as our eye follows the beat from left to right. Or even a pattern or shape can be used in gradation. Can you see where the artist Matisse used gradation in this painting? Look at the reddish curves on the left. This shape gets repeated 3 times, getting smaller as our eye travels up. To summarize, gradation is a byproduct of the principle of rhythm. It's a little something we can layer into our design. Gradation may be integrated into regular, irregular, and/or random rhythms. The one essential thing to keep in mind about rhythm, whatever type we choose, is the tremendous control it gives us over directing our viewers' attention up and around and over our design. Now, the third principle of design, proportion and scale. First, proportion. In design, proportion tells us how our design is visually divided. Let's say we have a line that's 8 units long. It doesn't matter if the units are inches, feet, or miles, but for this example, let's assume it's inches. Now let's say we want to break the line at the 3-inch mark. There are now 2 segments. The first is 3 inches, the second is 5 inches. The resulting ratio is 3 to 5. The ratio 3 to 5 describes the proportion, or the relationship between these 2 segments of the line. As it happens, the proportion 3 to 5 is rather famous in design circles. It's called the golden mean. As it turns out, the golden mean has been used extensively in Western architecture and art for centuries, millenniums even. There are many theories about why this proportion has been so heavily favored in design. Some believe the golden mean is intrinsically pleasing to humankind because the 3 to 5 proportion occurs so frequently in the natural world. The bodies of many animals and birds are proportioned along the 3 to 5 ratio. Even closer to home, the female body fits the golden mean. Look how this works. The height of the average female is about 8 heads, or 8 times the length of her head. The natural division of her waistline falls at the 3/8 mark. The rest of her body, extending from the waist to the soles of her feet, is 5/8 of her total height. There it is, that magic ratio of the golden mean, 3 to 5. Now let's talk about another concept related to proportion, scale. Scale asks the question, what's the best size for a particular design element? It's not hard to tell when a design element is out of scale. Take a look. What's wrong with this picture? Poor Alice's neck is out of proportion with the rest of her body. And here, poor Alice is out of proportion with the entire hallway. The concept of scale is easiest to understand as it relates to fashion. Men's clothing looks great on men, but absurd on little boys. We also want to be careful with accessories. Good scale requires that design elements, in this case the accessories, are the right size in relation to the surroundings. The surroundings here would be the people using the accessories. So let's review proportion and scale. These principles focus on how the parts of the design relate to the design as a whole. The most pleasing proportion is that which approximates the golden mean, 3 to 5. To achieve good scale, ask yourself how each proportion of the design relates to the composition as a whole. The distinct elements need to be the right size in relation to the overall presentation. We now arrive at our fourth principle of design, emphasis. Emphasis is also referred to as focal point. The concept is pretty simple. What do you, the designer, think is the most important visual element of your design? What's the one thing you really don't want anyone to miss? That's the focal point. Now, you don't absolutely need one, but without a focal point, your viewer's eye becomes bored, restless, and wanders over the design seeking something to hold its attention. When creating a focal point, the first order of business is deciding what you want to emphasize. You need to make sure the important elements look important. They should dominate over minor elements. To create all-important emphasis where you want it, you can use size. The bigger the feature, the more dominant it will be. Or you might use placement. Place something center front, and you've got a focal point. You can also use a brighter or more intense color against a muted background to create a focal point. And remember that a dramatic line, such as the diagonal, placed amid more sedate lines, horizontals and verticals, will always call attention to itself and become the focal point. In conclusion, when you choose a focal point, you've chosen an element you feel is important and want to emphasize. Emphasis is perhaps the most personal aspect of design. It tells us about you. After all, you've set up your design to ensure that your viewer's eye will rest on this one particular spot. Your emphasis communicates to the world where your artistic priorities lie and what you, the designer, find important. And last, but not least, we have the principle of harmony. We know harmony in music. Harmony in design is the visual equivalent. However, in design, harmony is easier to understand as a feeling rather than a technique. Harmony is what we're striving for in the end product. It is the goal of all design. Whether or not we've achieved harmony in design is a two-part question. First, are the elements of your design, the lines, colors, shapes, textures, working together in a pleasing fashion? Second, are the principles of design, balance, rhythm, proportion, scale, and emphasis, guiding your use of the elements? If your answer to both of these questions is yes, you will indeed have achieved harmony. Harmony is one of the most powerful forces in our world. It speaks directly to the human spirit. As a designer, this is your goal. With these principles as your guide, let your imagination take flight and create.